Most important word today in my talk is going to be entrepreneur. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Now, I'm also a philosopher by training, by profession, and you are psychologists and training to be psychologists. So the concept I want to use as the bridge concept is the concept of a mindset. Now, we humans are smart, potentially smart. The most important asset we have is our big brain and how we train it and how we decide to use it. And that's a huge overlap between philosophy and psychology. What's the nature of our mindset? Now, partly also, though, I want to make some points about history and the unique and, in my concept, revolutionary times that we are living in. And it's very easy as people in the 21st century to take for granted these kind of magnificent facilities that we are spending our time in right now. That we all have nice clothes, we all eat well, we all have technological devices that are almost like magic. We have air conditioning when it's too hot, we have heating when it's too cold. We expect to live, people your age, from the time you are born, about 80 years. And then how you are going to think about your life, decide what kind of person you are going to be, create your skills and your habits, and then go forth and live your life. The way we do it now is revolutionary. Now, of course, there are some things we're human beings have always been human beings. But the last 3 to 4 centuries have amounted to a revolution in almost every important area of human life. And it's the dwelling on that revolution and what it means for how we now need to think, especially about our lives, that I'm going to be focusing on in this talk. Now, we're going to talk a lot about mindset, but I actually want to start in the stomach and talk about ulcers. And the first story I want to tell you is a story about this guy, the Earl of Shaftesbury, and we're going to go back 345 years. Early in the modern world. Shaftesbury is an earl, big deal, huge, high up in the political establishment in Britain. Extraordinarily rich, powerful man. Terrible ulcers, acid, painful, debilitating, and he had tried everything. The best doctors for many years could not help him with his ulcers. Now, a young doctor, a guy you probably know his name, named John Locke. Now, we know John Locke as a great philosopher and a great political philosopher. But before he was lucky enough to become a philosopher, he was first trained as a medical doctor. And he was young and smart, and so Shaftesbury was desperate. His doctors didn't know what to do, but they said, we've heard good things about this young fellow, John Locke, not much older than most of you here. Let's give this guy a try. So they brought in John Locke. He does an initial diagnosis of the ulcers. Now, how do we think about ulcers? What's our mindset? That's the first issue here. Now, we could say, look, human beings have always had ulcers. It's just the way things are. Right? There's nothing we can do, right? It's part of nature's plan. Maybe it's part of God's plan. Or my mindset might be, well, maybe we should try to do something and not just say that's just the way it is and not do anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and read some old books that were written 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and I will just follow what they say in the books. And the young John Locke, and this is an indication of a new mindset that is emerging, said, I'm not going to do any of that. He said, what I'm going to do is look at the problem afresh. We have too much acid in the stomach here. How do we get the acid out when it becomes a problem? And what he then said is, well, I'm going to find a metalsmith. And he went and found a metalsmith. This is someone who works with metals. and buy a bunch of gold. Gold is expensive, but Shaftesbury is rich, no problem. And I'm going to make a little spigot. I don't know the Spanish word for spigot, but when you water your garden with the hose at the end, there's a spigot. You can turn it off and you can turn it on. Very small, made of gold, doesn't tarnish, and it will have a flange on the inside and a flange for the outside. We take Shaftesbury and we get him drunk, completely drunk until he passes out. So here I am, young John Locke. And what am I going to do? I'm going to go to one of the richest and most powerful men in the world, certainly in Britain. I'm going to get him drunk. We're going to lay him down on a table. And I am going to drill a hole into his stomach. Put the flange in, the spigot, put some stuff around it, keep it clean, drunk some more alcohol on it. He wakes up, recovers, and it works. Every time Shaftesbury's ulcers act up, he's debilitating. He can step aside, take a little bowl, lean over, open the spigot, drain out the excess acid, immediately, relief. Okay. Now, think about the mindset that it takes. I don't know who you think is a rich and powerful person, right? But for you to say, I'm going to get you drunk and drill a hole into your body and put this thing in, okay? That's a certain kind of mindset. Something that had not been done, experimental, high risk, but I'm going to do that. All right, that's one story. Now I want to jump almost 3 centuries, actually a little over 3 centuries, to this guy. You may not know him, but he's very famous in the world of medicine, Nobel Prize winner in medicine. Another great success story, but also with respect to ulcers. Because what is interesting about ulcers is 300 years later, despite all of the advances in medical science, by the time we got to the 1980s, we still did not know what the cause of ulcers is. And Barry Marshall was determined that he was going to figure it out. Now, a little bit of context here. He's a young doctor, a little bit older than most of you in this room right now, just finished his medical education. But he's also working at a university in Australia. And one of the challenges one has as a young person is to get funding for one's research projects. Of course, you want to be an entrepreneur, it's hard to get funding. Just about anything, hard to get funding, big problem, right, and so forth. But when you're young, it's even more difficult because young people often have all kinds of new ideas, but older people have their ideas, their reputations are based on their ideas, and in many cases, the grant making is tied to their reputation and they control the grant making institutions and so forth. And it's not only that Barry Marshall was in Australia. Now, Australia is a very fine country, right? But from Barry Marshall's perspective, Australia is not Europe, where the huge amount of funding is available. Australia is not North America, where there's a huge amount of funding. So I'm a young doctor in this smaller country on the other side of the world. Not only that, it even gets worse. I'm not on the east coast of Australia, where there's Sydney and Canberra and Brisbane and so forth, Melbourne, all the famous. I'm way over in the western side of Australia in a much smaller city. So I have this idea that I think the prevailing theories about what causes ulcers are wrong. And the two prevailing theories at that time, everybody believed this, is that ulcers are caused either by bad diet, that's number one. So the nutritionists say, we own ulcers, we will solve the ulcer issue. Or you guys say, no, it was the psychologist said ulcers are caused by stress. Right? And so we, psychologists, we own ulcers, and if we want to work out how we're going to solve the problem, give us all of the grant money. And Barry Marshall said, I don't think so. I don't think it's either of those. I think it's bacteria. H. pylori, a special kind of bacteria that if ingested and is able to colonize itself is the real cause of ulcers. Diets might exacerbate it, make it a little bit worse. Stress might make it a little bit worse, but the real cause is biological. It's a bacterium. So he writes all kinds of grant proposals. Give me money, I want to research this. Nobody wants to give him any money. There's also a human ethics problem, because how are you going to do the experiments on that? How would you determine? Well, typically, the easiest way to do it would be to give some people, one test group, a whole bunch of the bacterium and see if they get ulcers. All right? How are you going to get that past the ethics board, particularly if you're a young guy out in Western Australia? He was going nowhere. So Barry Marshall said, I'm pretty sure that I'm right, and we have to do the test, so here's the experiment I'm going to do. I'm going to do it to myself. So he takes a beaker, he has a cultured set of the bacteria in the beaker, and of course his staff is around him, his research associates, and he takes the beaker and drinks it. Intentionally gives himself ulcers. Now, for the next 2 weeks, it was terrible for Barry Marshall because he got the ulcers and just terrible pain, terribly debilitating. But he had also cultured an antibiotic that would be able to kill that particular bacterium. So he let the symptoms develop, documented it, had his staff all document it. Then he took the antibiotic, drank that down, cured. It went away. Now again, the issue here is the mindset. Right? What kind of mind do you have to be willing to, despite the fact that all of the senior people in your field think your hypothesis is wrong, that you're in, so to speak, the wrong part of the world to get the big funding, that there is obviously huge risk associated with giving yourself a bacterium, right, that might cause debilitating health effects, but nonetheless, I am confident enough in my hypothesis and my abilities that I am going to do it. There's a mindset at work here. And that's the mindset that I want us to focus on. We know that that mindset, and this is just one disease, ulcers, has been operated, and modern medicine has been revolutionized over the course of the last 2 to 3 centuries. And why? Because human beings have been around not for hundreds of years, thousands of years, millennia, but hundreds of thousands of years. And it's only in the last couple of centuries that we start thinking differently and acting differently with respect to medical issues. And that has revolutionized it. Of course, we are all the beneficiaries of that. We live lives with a whole lot less pain. We live lives that are a whole lot longer. And what I want to do, though, is use this as an example to generalize, because it's not just in medicine that we are revolutionary. Obviously, we are revolutionary in technology. We're revolutionary with respect to our attitudes, with respect to women. You know, if you just go around the room, perhaps 50% of this classroom is women. The idea that women should have equal liberties, equal rights, be able to, that's a modern thing. When has that ever happened? With respect to slavery, mores, the way we do religion, the way we do politics, where we expect people not simply to obey and do what your leaders tell you to do, but to become an active thinker and do all of the arguments and come up with new ideas and try those ideas out. Very revolutionary way of living our lives that we're in. So, data. I'm a philosopher. Philosophers typically like just to make up their data. That's a little inside philosophy joke. I know you guys in the social sciences and psychology have better data handling habits, but here is some data. Moving away from medicine, this is now to start focusing on economic data. Perhaps you have seen this chart. This is one of the most amazing charts in all of human history. Figuring out what's going on here, I think, is perhaps the most important social science question in the world. This is year 2015. I assume you were in middle school at that point, less than 10 years. We go back to year 1. This is in political history for the West. Rome is no longer a republic, it's becoming an imperium. In religious history, this is the lifetime of Jesus here. So 2,000 years of human history. The vertical axis is a measure of how much productivity human beings are engaged in. We make stuff and we consume stuff. And so our level of productivity is an indication of how well we are living, at least with respect to the material products of a business economy. And what this says is human beings were close to what we now think of as the poverty line, all human beings, pretty much in all cultures around the world. This is a world average. If you were to take this and go back 2,000 years, same. Multiply that by 10, 40,000 years, the same. Human beings, the number of calories we can take in compared to the number of calories we can produce, very close. And then 1,000 years, nothing has changed. Now we're in the middle of the Middle Ages. Then around here, you can't quite see it, but this line is moving. Now, it's maybe a 20% increase. Okay? And that's significant, 20% increase in just 1 or 2 centuries. Then we jump another couple of centuries, and it's now a 50 to 60% increase. We are half again as productive, half again as rich. And then as we get into the modern world, 19th century, 20th century, it just takes off. That is stunning. This is the world average. That is to say, if we take all of the countries in the world, when we travel to them, Guatemala is somewhere in the middle right now. You go to the places that are really, really poor, and you average those with all of the places that are very, very rich. Right? You put them all together, you get this line. But what this means is that even if you go into the places in the world right now, that you would say, I cannot believe how poor people are in these places. It's awful, it's terrible. Those people are rich, unbelievably rich by historical standards. That is amazing. Why did that happen? And why did it happen in some places in the world first? First in England, then more broadly in Britain, then in Western Europe, and then across the ocean in North America, to a lesser extent in Latin America. Why have some places increased only a little bit, but still impressively, and other places are skyrocketing? That's a revolution. And thinking about what that revolution, or caused that revolution, the mindset that led to it. And also, this is what I want us to focus on, because we are born into this world. What does this mean for our mindset now about how we need to live our lives? And also what is possible for us when we live our lives? We're still human beings, but we are living in unbelievably different social and economic and political circumstances, and that requires a different kind of mindset. Now you can break this data down a little bit more. One of these lines, they all are doing the same thing. There are a bunch of revolutions. Some of it is the Industrial Revolution, Scientific Revolution, Medical Revolution, revolution in women's rights, the revolution that got rid of slavery, the revolution that brings democratic Republican politics, the revolution that means that we're living in market economies, to some extent freer market economies, and so on. And they're all happening at the same time. They're all influencing each other. The causal effects are important as well. But just notice that one of them is life expectancy. It's this blue line here. That is to say, if you look at human beings at birth, for the most part, they would live 20 years, 25 years on average in the poor parts of the world. The middle wealth parts of the world, maybe 30 years. The richer countries in the world, 35, maybe 40 years of life. So how do you think about your life if you are born into a society where on average you can expect people to live 30, 40, maybe 50 years? Versus you, how are you thinking about your life when you know you're going to have 80 years? And maybe that's a little bit pessimistic, because maybe you will get 90 years. And you're going to bring children into the world. And if these trends are correct, they will perhaps on average get 100 years, 110 years to live. You think about your life differently if you only expect 40 years, or you expect your kids only to have 40 years. Also, when you are rich, you probably don't think of yourself as a particularly rich person by, I don't know, Bill Gates or Elon Musk standards. Okay, oh, I'm so poor, right? Compared to Elon Musk. But you are rich compared to people 100 years ago. Amazingly rich compared to people 200, 300 years ago, and so forth. Rich people think about their lives differently. You have more opportunities, more things that you expect for your life. You have higher standards. And part of that is that you expect your kids are going to be richer than you are. So your expectations for your kids change. It's not just, well, we're poor, my dad was poor, my grandfather was poor, we've always just been poor, that's just the way it is. That's a mindset. I'm rich, and I understand how it is that I'm in a culture that enabled me to be rich, and I want to become richer, and I think that's possible. And I want my kids to be even richer. That's a completely different mindset. That's a modern mindset, only widespread in the last couple of centuries or so. We think differently about our lives. Now, drilling down even more narrowly, the trend is accelerating. Right? So I want to suggest that if we focus just in the business life, now we talk about life in general, what's your medical prognosis, what's your life expectancy, what's your political regime, if you're a woman, what opportunities are open to you, right, and so forth. But think just more narrowly about work and work in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years or so. My lifespan and a little bit more, the lifespan of your professors or so. Now, we're rich, but statistic from Professor Stephen Rogers at Harvard University, who is studying the way people think about their work. Now, if you think about your work in one sense, these numbers sometimes are a little bit sobering, right? So you think, I'm going to spend more time in my adult life working than doing anything else. I'm going to sleep 8, 9 hours, maybe a little more on the weekends. I'm going to spend time eating, bathing, paying the bills, right? A few more hours right, each week, time with my friends and with my family. But for most people, their work is 8 to 10 hours a day. And then particularly when you are young and just building your career, it's even more of that. And you're going to do that for decades. Work is perhaps the most significant, or in the top 3 most significant elements of your life. What is your mindset toward your work? Right? Now, one kind of mindset, of course, is, well, I have to work. Right? Nobody's going to give me money. I'm not going to win the lottery. I wasn't born into a super rich family, so I have to work. And my parents are making me go to school, and my professors are telling me to learn all of these things. And I'm going to go to a job, and maybe it's not a job that I particularly like. And I'm going to go there, and 5 days a week, maybe 6 if I have to work overtime. My boss is going to tell me what to do. I'm working for the man, and I'm going to do that for 45 or 50 years until I retire. And then I'm going to be old and worn out, and maybe I've paid off my mortgage. I hope so. That would be nice. Right? That's my work life. Okay? And that's a disaster, right? If that's your mindset with respect to your work. But of course, that has been the reality of the work life for most of human beings, for most of human history. They didn't get a choice about what their jobs were going to be. You're a boy, you do boy things. You're a girl, you do girl things. And you're born into a certain class structure. And since you are in this class and not in this class, you are allowed to do this kind of work and you're not allowed to do that kind of work. It's by and large scripted for you. In tribal societies, which is most of human history, most cultures, or in feudal societies, hierarchical societies as well. Everything very scripted. You don't have choices. One of course, the great revolutions of the modern world has been to say, no, you are free. You are a free agent, and you can do whatever you want. Right? You don't have to think of work as something that is put on you. Now, if you want to live, and you want to live well, if that's your choice, that's your value, then you are going to choose to become ambitious and work hard, work smart, and become very productive. But also, you have all of these options available to you. Now, one of the big divides at that point is then to say, well, do I want to go to work for someone else? And that's fine. That's time-honored, right way of doing things. There are other people who have started business, built them up. They're very successful. If you enjoy that kind of work skill set, you like that product, you go to work for them, and you can put together a very good life. In the modern world, though, what we have increasingly emphasized, and we see these statistics every generation as we go on, is more people saying, when they are young, like you, is maybe I will work for someone else if I find the right fit, if it works for me, but maybe I should start my own business. You know, I've got my own ideas. I like being my own boss. I like a salary, but I know that entrepreneurs can become really rich if they have good ideas. And I'm confident about my ideas and so forth. I want to be totally in charge of my own business destiny. And so entrepreneurism is something that has become increasingly prominent as we have gotten further and further into the modern world. Every generation, more entrepreneurs, more entrepreneurial aspiration among young people. Now, the 20th century, the century before many of you were born, I am guessing, was revolutionary in this regard. But at the same time, because of the amazing economic powers that were unleashed, it was also the era of the corporation. And the corporation, large-scale operations, came into existence and increasingly dominated the business and economic landscape. But that is deceptive in one sense, and that's the point of this quotation here. So this is Stephen Rogers talking about the Fortune 500 companies. Fortune is a magazine, a business magazine. Every year they publish a list of the 500 biggest corporations in the world. Most of them are Estados Unidos, right, as we expect, significant number in Europe, various other places right around the world. So it's a largely American list. So if we just look at the American employment data, where are people working? 1960s, 1 out of every 4 persons in the United States worked for a Fortune 500 company, so 25% of the population. Now that's interesting, because then that's to say 75% of the US population is not working in big companies. They're working in small companies, or family businesses, or entrepreneurial startups. So already, even though we talk hugely about the importance and power of big corporations, it's a smaller minority portion of the business landscape. That was 1960. By the time we get to, this is now at the turn of the 20th century, around when you were being born, all of you, only 1 out of every 14 people is working for Fortune 500 companies. And that is a much smaller percentage, less than 10%, closer to 5%. That then is to say 90 to 95% of all people are not working in big companies. They're working in small companies, family businesses. They are becoming more entrepreneurial. Thousands and thousands, millions and millions of entrepreneurial startups, as people are taking charge of their business life more and more as time goes on. And statistics published now, right, we can check these statistics, show that that trend line is continuing. So that then is to say we're in an environment where more people are entrepreneurial, and to think as an entrepreneur about your work life is different from thinking about your work life as, I will show up at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Someone else has done all of the strategic thinking. There's a division of labor. I do this part. My boss gives me what I'm supposed to do. I execute the orders of my boss. That's a different mindset, significantly. So, trending. One other measure to look at. Small print, but this is fun. This is the year 2000, again, when you were born. And this is another Fortune 500 list of the top 10 corporations. Okay. And we read through them. Most of these we are familiar with. These are like huge, huge corporations. So General Motors, they make cars. Walmart, retail. Exxon, oil, gas, those products. Ford, more cars. General Electric, appliances. IBM, that's an interesting one to look at. The computers. Right? Citigroup, banking, finance. AT&T, telecommunications. Philip Morris, tobacco. Boeing, airplanes. 10 biggest corporations in the United States, just huge. Now, if you were to go back 20 years earlier to 1980, and you look at the Fortune 500 list, only 2 of those companies that are on this list were on the list in 1980. 8 out of the 10, or 9 out of the 7 out of the 10, to double check on that, are newcomers. They were smaller companies that took off between 1980 and the year 2000 and became the largest in the United States. That is to say, they're still close to their entrepreneurial roots. And the companies that used to be big are now relatively smaller. So there's a lot of changeover. It's not a static big companies dominating the business environment that we are talking about. Now, that's year 2000. This is the year 2020, right? I chose this one because this is COVID, and we're always going to be now talking before COVID and after COVID. It's becoming one of our historical benchmarks. But this is the list of the top 10 companies on the Fortune 500 in 2020. Walmart, Amazon, Apple, CVS Health, United Health Group, Berkshire Hathaway, McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Alphabet, ExxonMobil. Who is Alphabet? Tell me, young people, who is Alphabet? That's Google. Yes, that's the parent company that owns Google and that suite of companies as well. So compare the 2 lists. And I'll just do the quick thing because I'm feeling some time pressure here. But again, 8 out of the companies here are not on the list anymore. They've declined. And we are populated with a whole bunch of new companies. Right? Companies that, if you go back 20 or 30 years ago, were small, were just being imagined. They were entrepreneurial startups. So Walmart is, of course, the big exception here. It moved from second to first. Good. What's the other one that's the same? Exxon. Exxon was third. Now it's down to 10th. Just hanging on, right? We want to stay on the top 10 list. But will they stay in the top 10 list? Probably not. Now, 1980, churn. 1960, 1940, churn. What this then is saying is not only are most people not working for big corporations, the big corporations themselves are constantly changing as the old ones decline, go out of existence, and people with new ideas and a lot of energy come along and transform the business environment. That's the world that we live in. Now think about this in contrast about how revolutionary it is and what it means for a human mindset. 500 years ago, you're a young person, you're thinking, what do I want my life to be all about? Already answered. And you're not the one who's going to answer that question. It has been decided for you, right? What your business life is going to be about, how you are going to make a life. I would like to talk about my last name. My last name is Hicks. I come from a long line of farmers. Right? In English, it means people who work the earth, right, or farmers. And as far as we go back, it's just farmer, 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 farmer. First generation to go to university in the entire Hicks family line. Right? So in one sense, I'm a very modern person. 300 years ago, young Stephen Hicks, what am I going to do with my life? Farmer. Right? End of story. Okay? I'm going to marry a young woman. Right? What's her job going to be? Decided. Marry one of those nice Hicks farmer boys, right? Make a family, right? That's your job. It's already set. Right? Completely different environment. Now we think about everything, and we can think about everything. But it takes a certain kind of mindset to be able to think about everything and take on this project of what your economic life is going to be. Now, the trend again is accelerating. We can talk about industrial revolution, scientific revolution, entrepreneurial revolution, et cetera, et cetera. All of these revolutions feed on each other, and the trend lines continue. So in your generation, we're having huge discussions about robotics. Now, robotics, in a sense, is an old story. It goes back to the 1700s when we started making machines, robots, to do various sorts of things. Steam engines and various other kinds of things powered by water wheels. Those are primitive, right, robots, things that go of themselves. But the trend is again accelerating. And now with the marriage of all of that old industrial technology and electricity technology and new computer programming, we're going to have robots. And so one of the things that, this is the double-edged sword, you have to think about, but also you get to think about, that's the other side of the sword, is what will the impact of robotics be on my career? And a big part of the problem is that you don't know the answer to that question right now. You can't predict that. But you do know that it is going to have an impact, and you have to be ready for that impact. And that's a new kind of problem, even if you're a farmer now, right? You know, if I'm a farmer 500 years ago and I'm thinking about how is technology going to evolve and impact my career over the next 20 or 30 years? Well, probably it's not going to evolve. I'm using the same technology my grandparents used and so forth for 3 generations, right? Now, we know it's changing, but we have no idea what that new technology is going to look at. But I have to be ready for it. How do I prepare myself to be ready for the robots? Now, you are preparing yourselves for professional lives, industrial psychology, various other kinds of cognitive psychology, therapy, and so forth. How is technology and robotics going to transform how you do your career? But at the same time, you are going to be working with people who are your clients, your customers, right, who are themselves in the workplace, who are in business professions that are dramatically being challenged by robotics. That's going to put huge psychological stresses on them that you are going to help them deal with. And also it's going to open up new opportunities for them that you are going to help them have the mindset that they will be able to spot those opportunities and act on them when they arise. So for you, it's twice as important a question. Right? You have to figure it out for yourself, but also as a professional, how to think about what robotics is going to do for all of my future clients. Because as psychologists, as psychology professionals, our job is cultivating people's mindset so they can function well in the world. And the world is being transformed by robotics. Artificial intelligence, close cousin, right, and so forth. You might say that the robotics is transforming what we sometimes call the blue-collar world, people who work with their hands. Of course, they have to use their brains, but this is I just want to dwell on this picture. This is a car-making factory, right? A modern car-making factory. And again, 20 years ago, only 20 years ago, if you went into that car-making factory, what did you see? Instead of 4, 5, 10 robots, you would see 50, 60, 100 human beings who are all doing various jobs. And now all of those human beings are gone, and the robots are doing those jobs. And then the big question is, well, what are those human beings doing now? Right? And that's a huge industrial psychology, industrial economics question. How do we prepare the people who are not only in this field, but all of the other fields, transforming themselves so that they can be entrepreneurial as a result of those impacts? Artificial intelligence, okay, same story, but here maybe a little more focused on white collar, as we sometimes call it, right? People who don't do very much with their hands or their bodies, so to speak, but they use their minds, they use their brains. So how is robotics combined, say, with artificial intelligence going to change medical practice, and I imagine we've all seen the YouTube videos about surgeries, right, in the next generation, right? But also translators, book editors, illustrators, movie making, people who do accounting, people who are lawyers. All of the professions are going to be hugely impacted by artificial intelligence. So whatever your area of specialty within psychology is, maybe you are going to be working with people who are in this economic sector. How is it to help those people be able to navigate that landscape part of my job now, not only for me, navigating my own profession as well. Again, revolutionary times and so forth. So here's the challenge. We'll come back to the theme of mindset. We're in the education context. All right, I'm a professional educator. You are people who are going through education. Most of you, I assume, are in your early 20s. It's worth thinking about just how revolutionary we are that still you are being educated for your life when you are in your early 20s. In contrast, again, to just a few centuries ago where you got to 8th grade. Wow, that's impressive. Right, now get to work, right, for the rest of your life. And then you got through high school. Amazing. Right? That was my parents' generation. Wow. Okay, now get to work. Right? So we're saying life is becoming, in some sense, more complicated, but also more opportunities. And to prepare people to be able to take on that challenge takes longer and longer, right, amounts of time. But if we take all of this together, we're trying to say, okay, I'm trying to prepare myself for my life 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, and I don't know when I'm going to stop working, whatever that is. What's my work life going to be? And the first big thing is we don't really know. We don't know what the jobs are going to be. Right now we have millions of computer programmers making a good living. Nobody knew that we needed millions of computer programmers 50 years ago. We have hundreds of thousands of people, maybe now millions with the revolution in the technologies of people making a living as voice editors, graphic editors, film editors. We didn't know we needed all of those people 100 years ago. When my mother was going through high school, she was very forward thinking, and the most important class she was taking, according to her teachers, was typing, learning how to become a really good typist. That's the career move for modern-looking women, right? All right, and then my generation, everybody needs to learn how to do computer programming. Right? Huge amounts of resources invested in computer programming. Well, we don't really need typists anymore. Will we need computer programmers in 10 years? Well, maybe, I don't know. 20 years? 30 years? Hard to say. What will that be? We don't know what those jobs are. We also don't know where these people are going to be working because, right, everybody's going to be working for Google or Microsoft, right, or Apple. Well, nobody knew that 50 or 60 years ago. Those companies didn't exist. And if that trend continues, the companies that are going to be the big employers don't exist yet, or they are just existing as ideas in the minds of people like you who are entrepreneurial, smart, young, and energetic, who are going to go out and start those companies, and they are going to be the ones that take off over the course of the next 20 years or so. So here we are in education, trying to figure out, how are we supposed to be doing our job? I'm a professor, you're students, and many of you are professors as well. How do we do education well to prepare people for this? It's a new challenge, right? It's a revolutionary world that we live in, and that means we need to rethink our entire approach to the educational process. If this concept of being entrepreneurial, for example, which is the one that I'm pushing, right, as the mindset here, be like John Locke solving the ulcer problem, Barry Marshall solving the ulcer problem, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and dozens of other famous people in all kinds of walks of life. They have a certain mindset. In many cases, they're not smarter, they don't know more, but nonetheless, they approach their problems in their lives a little bit different. How do we figure out what that is so that we can internalize it, work on it in our own lives, and then if we're going to be teachers, parents, educators, and psychologists, practicing psychologists are teachers, right? Usually one-on-one small group teaching all of your career. How do we teach that mindset? What does that involve? Well, it's complicated. Here are some suggestions. One way of thinking about it is, suppose I like working with my hands, but how can I compete with robots? I like working with my mind. How can I compete with artificial intelligence? That's one lens to think about it. What's my competitive advantage going to be? Now this is just one set of data. I want to commend this to you thinking about. This is a survey from about 10 years ago of some high-level human resources executives and others who hire lots and lots of people. And typically what they do, these were all Americans, is that usually toward the end of the academic year, they go into all of the big universities and they recruit from the students. They set up their booths, they have their representatives, and they're trying to get the best students to come to work for their companies. Now what this study was doing was asking those people, what are you looking for in the students who are coming out of universities and college to hire them into your company? And basically they want everything, right? They want the perfect employee, right, who can do basically magically everything. But then we start to get a little more fine-grained. Do we want them to be organized? Do we want them to be able to speak well? Do they want to be work with people of diverse backgrounds, good at teamwork, tech skills? Can they write? Can they do math? Can they, when new technologies come along, they're not scared of them. They like the new technologies. They know how to find information in the new media environment and so on. So we have this great long list of all these wonderful things we want people to do. But let's get serious. Which of these things really are important? More important than others. So this more important than that, right, and so on, and then we map that. Which ones are most essential? These ones, nice, but not really essential. These ones, if you don't have them, we're not going to look at you. These are the really essential ones. So what that then is to say, media literacy, not that important. Can you find stuff on Google? Okay, who cares, right? Can you write? Pretty important, but not the most important thing. A lot of social skills and communication skills seem to be really important. Can you think critically? That is to say, here's a suggestion. You can find 5 objections to that. Or you have your own idea about how to solve a problem. You can step outside of that idea and say, well, here are some weaknesses in my idea. Even though I made that idea up myself and I like it very much, I can have a critical perspective. Problem solving. That's not to say that my professors have given me problems and I can copy how to solve the problems that my professors, and I know that the right answer is at the back of the book. I can look it up. This is a problem no one has solved before, and I know how to tackle it, how to break it down, how to look at it from different perspectives, how to try various experiments and so on, whatever goes into all of the problem solving. So these are the things that are the competitive advantage. These are the really important things. Right. How well can robots do those? How well can artificial intelligence do those things? Well, better and better. But this is where you need to focus, and then with your clients, help them focus on developing these traits as well. The other interesting thing is the vertical axis here. When they're looking at students who are coming out of very good universities in the United States primarily, how easy is it to find people who can do these things among college graduates? Well, pretty easy. Right? By the time you get through university, you should be basically organized. Proficiency with technology, well, most of them pretty good with that. Writing, not very many are good at writing. Can take an idea, explain it quickly, clearly, and effectively to someone else. Very rare. People who can do math, not very many at all. But we live in this amazing scientific and technological society. And that's to say, basically, it's 1% who are doing all of the math for us, and the rest of us are, yeah, exactly. That's right. creativity. No, 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 they know how to follow the rules, they know how to do what they are told, but they can't do anything new and original. Very few people have those creative skill sets. That then is an indication, if you are looking for your creative advantage, what you want to do is focus on the things that are in the top half of the chart here. And then when you are working with your customers and clients, help them develop those traits as well. But the real mother lode, of course, is this upper right quadrant. The people who are going to be the most successful, the most able to navigate the new environment are the people who can do the critical thinking and the problem solving. Those are the people who will be making the robots and designing the AI programs and applying them. And hopefully that's you and the people that you are working with in your careers. Now, you get all analytic, you're doing 22 years. By the time you get your bachelor's degree of education, you consider lots of lists, lots of things you have to think through. Knowledge, all of the skills, right? All of the character and habits and all the things that Maria Marti was talking about, particularly with respect to self-esteem as a component and how it's connected. Thinking through all of this is, of course, hugely important, and that's why we spend years and years in it. And it will continue all through your life, that project. But I want to do one more story. This is also in medical stuff. I did a lot of philosophy of science when I was in graduate school, and I love the history of medicine. All these fascinating, right, terrible stories, but also positive success stories. I want to choose someone who's right in the middle between Barry Marshall in the late 20th century and John Locke in the middle part of the 17th century, just to show a kind of continuity here. This is Ignaz Semmelweis. Locke was an Englishman, Barry Marshall was an Australian. He was a Hungarian who was a young doctor at the University of Vienna, which was then one of the great revolutionary medical establishments, and it was also a teaching hospital associated with the University of Vienna. Now, this is a middle-aged portrait of Ignaz Semmelweis, but when he is doing what I'm going to tell you about, he was just a little bit older than you, still in his 20s. Newly arrived at the University of Vienna, the big city, the Mecca where everything is happening that's amazing and special. And I'm from some more backwater place out in Hungary, right? And so the Viennese typically are looking down on the Hungarians a little bit. So there are some social issues that go along. So he shows up at the University of Vienna Hospital in the early 1840s as a young teaching research professor, full of energy, full of ideas. He wants to improve the medical world. This is the hospital. You can see it's just a huge, huge complex. Now, the particular thing that caught Semmelweis's attention was women who were pregnant. When they came to Vienna Hospital to give birth, terrible things seemed to be happening. Women who did not give birth in Vienna Hospital survived more than women who were giving birth inside Vienna Hospital. Now, this is a bit of a scandal, right, for the medical profession. But also he noticed that there were two wards or two different areas in the hospital where pregnant women who came into the hospital would be assigned, right? And they had different doctors and different everything. So just arbitrarily, one of them was like over here, one ward, the first ward, and one of the other wards was over here, the second ward. And what Semmelweis noticed, or it seemed to him as he's going around doing his rounds, there was pregnant women, they give birth, this one survived, this one died. Sad. And then this one died too, and then this one died, and then some lived and so on. So he started to say, it seems to me that more women over here are dying as a result of giving childbirth than the women are over here. So he goes through all of the records, does the statistical analysis, and it turns out he is right, that lots of women are dying inside the hospital relative to outside of the hospital, big problem. But also, the women who were in this part of the hospital were 4 times as likely to die after giving childbirth than the women over here giving childbirth. So what's going on? This is a disaster. So, Barry Marshall, when he was working on the ulcers, he did a certain amount of thinking, did the experiment. Basically, it was all done in 1 month. John Locke, a couple of days for diagnosis and preparation, then one operation, right, problem solved. Part of the entrepreneurial mindset is not just that audacity, right, and that courage, right, and the willingness to try new things, but being willing to stay with it for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, until you achieve success. So Semmelweis, young doctor, starts to work on this problem. And he starts to come up with all kinds of creative hypotheses. He starts to think, well, maybe it's the position that women are giving birth. Right? I'm not going to duplicate this, but some women, right, are on their back, right, legs spread, and they give birth in that position. But it was also popular to have women on their side, raise a leg, and have them give birth. Maybe this is the problem. In one place, we're doing back, and one place, we're doing side. Because I noticed this difference. So I'm going to set up an experiment. I have to talk with all of the other doctors, get the women's permission. We run this experiment. It takes a certain amount of time. After we run all of that experiment, it turns out it makes no difference. So, do I give up? Do I say, well, look, women die in childbirth. That's just the way it always has been, right? Nature's plan, right? God's plan. Who knows, right? No. I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to try other things. Maybe it is how long they are in the hospital after being admitted. Do they give birth right away? Do they give birth a day, 2, 3 days later? Again, a big experiment, lots of data gathering, lots of permissions gotten. It makes no difference. Maybe he runs through 3 or 4 different experiments. It's now 1842, 1843, and women are still dying at terrible rates. 1844, he's getting desperate because he's now tried 8 or 9 different experiments. Then he noticed, this is my favorite hypothesis, he notices that there's a priest. Vienna is by and large Catholic, and there's a priest who has his office in this main complex here. But the priest, every time someone is about to die, is called to give last rites to the person who is dying. And typically what the priest does is he leaves here, he goes into this division, and then goes wherever he needs to go into the hospital. And that's just to say, he's almost always going through there, but he's not very often going through here. So maybe it's got to do with the priest. Right? The priest is the problem. And here we get psychological in our explanation. We say something like, well, the priest in this context is a symbol of death. Right? We know someone's going to die. And if you see a priest going through in that context, it depresses you. And the pregnant women who have just given birth, maybe they're also physically exhausted, right? And they're damaged, and they're, close to the edge. Am I going to live? Am I not going to die? And then I see the priest, and I say, oh, it's all over. And just, okay. So he is getting desperate. But he says, okay, I am a modern guy. We should be able to do an experiment. So I'm going to go to the priest, and he's a good guy. I know this, and I'm going to ask him, whenever you are going to go out into the hospital to do your last rites, don't go through the first division. Right? Go out this way, go out the main entrance, go the long way so that nobody sees you until you show up where you need to give the last rites. Priest says, okay. They run the experiment, days go by, weeks go by, months go by, calculate all of the data. It makes no difference whatsoever. It's not the priest. All right, have you given up yet? How many people would give up at this point? Years have gone by. Failed experiment after failed experiment. Then one day he got lucky. In a very dark way, lucky. One of his colleagues, Professor Kolechka, got the same symptoms and died as the pregnant women. Where there was a certain set of symptoms that he had noticed all of these women had. And then suddenly this male physician, who obviously had not given birth, had exactly the same symptoms and died. But we knew what caused Kolechka's death. He, as a professor, had been working with students, and this is a teaching hospital, in the anatomy lab. And in the anatomy lab, what they do is they bring in corpses, dead bodies, and they do dissections on the dead bodies to figure out, right, what's going on, and they teach students anatomy and physiology and so on. And Kolechka, while one of his students was doing a dissection on this dead body, had pointed at something in the body. He said, "Look at this." And the student's scalpel, the knife, had slipped and cut his finger. The next day, Kolechka's sick, very sick, dead. Now we know what caused Kolechka to die. The tissues, or part of the body of the dead person, had been introduced into his bloodstream and entered into his circulatory system. So whatever it was that was causing the death was that. Now then the question is, how is it though that the body parts or skin tissues from dead people are getting to the women? And what he noticed was that professors like Kolechka, they would take their students, they would go to the anatomy lab, do the dissections, and then after anatomy class, they go into the hospital and they go to the obstetrics ward where women have given birth. And they are teaching the students how to deal with women who are giving birth, pregnant, and so forth. But women who have gone through birth, in many cases, have abrasions and cuts in the vaginal and other area. And so they are handling the women in this teaching context after having been in the anatomy lab. And this is before germ theory. This is before antibiotics. So they kind of perfunctorily wash their hands, go and handle the women. So the problem is, it's the students who are causing the problem. Now, not just the students and the professor who are taking the dead material, transferring it here. Now the point is that this took experiment after experiment after experiment, creative thinking after creative thinking after creative thinking, a commitment to problem solving after problem solving after problem solving over the course of many years. Finally, we know what caused these women to die. The problem has been solved. We have a solution. Now, I, young Professor Semmelweis, of course, I'm only in my 20s, now I have to go and talk to all of the old professors and all of the senior doctors who have all of the power and tell them they are killing their patients and they need to change everything in order to survive. That's the entrepreneurial mindset. Now, the point of this is dwelling on some medical examples from John Locke, early in the modern world, Semmelweis, middle part of the modern world, Barry Marshall coming into our generation. That's what has made the modern world what the modern world has been, a new kind of mindset that human beings did not have very much of. We need, each of us in our own lives, to recognize that that's the world that we are entering into. That's the world that I need to prepare myself for, and as professionals help other people who are in my charge prepare for. I'm going to end with this slide. This is one of my favorite paintings. It's an American painter named Brian Larson. But I love this painting for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's a little girl, and she's doing something that's traditionally a little boy thing, right? Playing with blocks, and she clearly, as a young age, she wants to become a builder. And in the background, we can see that she's part of a modern world that has already accomplished some pretty amazing things. And she, as a young person, she's going to do her own thing, whatever they are, in order to surpass them and go on and do even better things. She's a young entrepreneur, and she's doing the kinds of things that entrepreneurs do. But maybe the most important thing, I'll just close with this thought here, is she's already working. And how we think about work in the modern world, it should not be, well, there's all this entrepreneurial activity and everything is very entrepreneurial, and that's going to put lots of pressures and challenges on me. Oh no, right? And of course, it's a little bit disconcerting to have to think about that. But think and try to think of it more as fun. Right? We have opportunities and resources available to us as human beings that have never been available. We can do anything that we want with our work lives. And just as little kids, when we would play and be absorbed and be creative and experimental, maintain that mindset all through your adulthood and until you become, as a mature mindset, entrepreneurial adult human being, you can put together not only the most flourishing life for yourself, but continue that great trend of what we've been accomplishing in the modern world. I'll stop there.